much-anticipated visit. It's a clear show of solidarity with Ukraine, but will it bring the weapons that Kyiv wants? Also on the program.
We are prepared for long haul. NATO allies are prepared to continue to provide substantial, unprecedented support to Ukraine.
As a two-day meeting of defense ministers draws to a close, NATO's Secretary General pledges the alliance's unwavering solidarity for Ukraine. And a confession brings the search for two missing men in the Amazon to a gruesome conclusion. Brazilian police say a suspect in the disappearance of a British journalist and an indigenous expert has admitted to killing them and has led authorities to some human remains. I'm Gerhard Elfers. Welcome to the program, which we begin with a breaking news. The leaders of France, Germany and Italy are in Kyiv in a show of solidarity with Ukraine. In their first visit together to Kyiv since Russia began its invasion, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, France's Emmanuel Macron and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi have met Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy for face-to-face talks. Earlier, Scholz, Macron and Draghi were taken on a tour of the Kyiv suburb of Irpin. That's the site of alleged Russian war crimes. The visit comes after days of speculation over whether it would go ahead, and as Ukraine intensifies its pleas for more heavy weapons from its Western allies. Speaking as the three leaders arrived in Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron had a message of unity for the Ukrainian people.
We are here, focused, and we will meet with President Zelenskyy now to visit a war site where massacres were committed and then to have planned talks with President Zelenskyy. I think it's an important moment. Do you have a message for the Ukrainians? A message of unity we're sending to the Ukrainians, yes, of support, to speak about today, but also the future, because we know the weeks to come will be very difficult.
Let's go straight to Kyiv right now, where our correspondent Emmanuel Scholz is standing by. Emma, the leaders of the EU's three biggest countries, Germany, France and Italy, are in Kyiv today. That is significant, is it not?
It is absolutely significant. It's, of course, a very strong sign of support from the West to Ukraine. It was a highly anticipated visit since the beginning of the war. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has always welcomed allies to Ukraine to visit him here in Kyiv. And I would say that the French President, the German Chancellor and the Italian Prime Minister, with that visit, really got the opportunity to see the whole picture on the ground. First off, they traveled overnight. This is a very long train ride to arrive up until Kyiv, so they can already see, what is happening there. Then this morning they visited the suburb of Kyiv, the suburb of Irpin, where a battle took place in March when Russian troops were very near the Ukrainian capital. They could see with their own eyes the extent of the destruction, the extent of the horrors that happened, that still continue to happen during this war, with French President Emmanuel Macron even saying that war crimes have been committed here. So that will make a difference. You know, it's very easy to make decisions in Berlin, make decisions in Paris. It's quite another story when you can get the full pictures with your own eyes on the field.
Now, we should mention that the Romanian Prime Minister is there as well. And we are waiting for a press conference that is due to start shortly. What can we expect?
Well, we don't know yet what has been talked about between President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the European leaders who are visiting him today, who will meet him today. What is anticipated is maybe something related to the delivery of weapons. The West has promised an extensive amount of weapons, included heavy weapons. The problem is on the Ukrainian side that they haven't been delivered extensively yet. And I
think the press conference there is about to start, and that... No, not yet. Let's come back to Emma for a moment. Emma, if you're still with us, I assume you are. What kind of reception did these European leaders get there in Ukraine, especially from the president?
Well, from the president, they will definitely be welcomed. Like I was saying, this is a highly anticipated visit. Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been communicating extensively on the needs of Ukraine in terms of heavy weapons, in terms of financial support. So this visit, on a diplomatic perspective, is highly anticipated and welcome. On the population side, however, this is another story. You know, there have been some mishaps of communication from the French side, with French President Emmanuel Macron saying that we must be careful, we, as in the West, must be careful not to upset Russia, not to humiliate Russia, in view of talks after the conflict, the armed conflict, stops here on the Ukrainian territory. Of course, this didn't go down quite well with the population here, because the population pays the heavy price, the heaviest price here of this war, with a lot of civilian losses, also up to 200 soldiers from the Ukrainian forces dying on a daily basis. So those comments didn't go down quite well. On the German side, Olaf Scholz maybe hasn't been the best communicant since the beginning of the war. It's not that Germany does nothing. Germany has done a lot. It has completely overturned its defense policy, its foreign policy traditions by agreeing to send weapons, and even heavy weapons, and a substantial amount of financial aid to Ukraine. The problem is that it hasn't delivered yet, and for a long time, Olaf Scholz hasn't really communicated very clearly. Of course, this is down to some security issues, but it's also an art of communication that didn't go down quite well here in Kyiv. So what we can not expect here is, the leaders maybe shaking hands with the people here, because they're not quite welcomed by a population that has lost its patience, as their, Ukrainian children are dying, Ukrainian soldiers are dying, so they lost a little bit of patience with the West. They want to see results now. They want to see the heavy weapons here.
Emmanuel Charles there for us, our correspondent in Kyiv right now. Thank you, Emma. To date, the German government has approved the delivery of around 350 million euros worth of weapons to Ukraine. Kyiv has been making urgent calls for more weaponry, such as tanks and multiple rocket launch systems. But there have been accusations from the opposition here in Berlin, too, that Germany is dragging its feet when it comes to supplying heavy weapons.
Olaf Scholz under pressure. Wherever he goes, the German Chancellor feels compelled to defend Germany's record on military support for Ukraine. Germany is one of the main military supporters of Ukraine. Nobody delivers as much as us. There are a few that are also doing a lot, like the United States, but Germany is one of the countries that is committing its capabilities on a very large scale. We have provided large numbers of anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft missiles and ammunition in huge quantities. But the weapons Germany has so far provided are small fry compared to heavy weapon systems other countries have already delivered, and that Ukraine says it desperately needs. In a historic vote at the end of April, the German parliament agreed to supply heavy weapons to Ukraine. But so far, not a single piece of heavy artillery has reached Ukraine from Germany. But much has been promised. Part of Scholz's pledge are 7 German-made howitzer 2000s. Ukrainian soldiers are currently being trained how to use them at a German army base. The howitzers will likely be sent to Ukraine at the end of June. The German Chancellor also agreed to provide 50 Gepard or Cheetah anti-aircraft tanks, the first of which could be delivered in July. At the start of June, Scholz announced that Iris-T surface-to-air missiles would also be readied for Ukraine's use. These missiles are Germany's most modern air defense system and would enable Ukraine to defend an entire city from Russian air attacks, Scholz said. Again, there is no clear deadline for when Ukraine will receive them. On a recent visit to Berlin, the head of Ukraine's parliament welcomed Scholz's announcement, but stressed that deliveries needed to arrive quickly. With dozens of Ukrainians dying every day, the country has no time to lose.
Now on that topic, let's bring in Roderich Kiesewetter. He's a member of the German parliament for the opposition Christian Democrats, and he's a defense and foreign policy expert who traveled to Ukraine last month himself. Mr. Kiesewetter, thank you for joining us here on DW News. I'm interested, firstly, to get your reaction to the visit by Chancellor Scholz to Ukraine today.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Elfers. This visit is overdue and also overburdened by expectations, because the Chancellor, he himself, has made some statements where we all are very excited what he will announce. Nevertheless, it is a very good sign that the three leaders of Central European states visit Kyiv, and it is also of utmost importance to give a sign of perspective to the Ukrainian people. That means a clear commitment for the accession candidate status to the European Union. But second and third, there are also other expectations. We need the delivery of heavy weapons, not only 3 MLRS systems, which is a very low number, or only 7 howitzers. The German industry already has announced that they are able to deliver about 100 Martin armored protected vehicles and about 100 Leopard tanks. This would be a real significant sign. Instead of this, our government has only offered some weapons which were not asked, like the Gepard tanks. And the third issue is we need that the Ukraine gets the sign to exist in its borders from January this year, and that we must not accept a so-called Minsk III line. So these are the expectations. Let's wait and see.
You have criticized Olaf Scholz, and other people have criticized Scholz for being too weak in his support of Ukraine and dragging his feet in speeding up weapons deliveries. 4 days ago, you said in an interview that you suspect that Scholz is under pressure from the Kremlin, and that, and I quote you here, Scholz isn't the master of his own decisions. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I do not understand why the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister for Economic Affairs have already signed the potential delivery to Ukraine, and the Chancellery is not supporting that. So the decisions are blocked in the Security Council, and we see also the dependency of the Social Democratic Party from some questions about the former Chancellor Schröder and other items. But what we want to see is that the Chancellor takes up the decision of the Parliament from the Bundestag as of 28th of April, where more than 500 members of Parliament have supported not only financial support and trauma and medical care, but also the delivery of heavy weapons like Leopard and Marder and heavy artillery. And we question why the Chancellor does not take over this strong request from the Parliament and is delivering. And there the questions are rising.
Now, about this delivery, the German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht had more to say today on the heavy weapons Germany is delivering. Let's have a quick listen.
We have made a very clear commitment that, along with our Dutch friends, we will provide the armoured howitzer 2000. The training is almost complete, so they can be deployed to Ukraine along with the Ukrainian soldiers who've been trained. Together with the UK and US, we will also supply multiple rocket launchers. Germany will provide 3 such systems, along with the appropriate number of rockets, spare parts and training. The anti-aircraft tank Gepard will be delivered in a timely manner too. Germany is standing by Ukraine.
So that was the German Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht speaking there. Roderich Kiesewetter, so she spelled out what Germany is sending. Is that enough for you?
Well, these are announcements, and probably by the end of June or in the course of the summer, these weapon systems will be delivered. Since April, we could have already delivered 30 Martin tanks and 30 Leopard tanks, but these were highly welcome, but they were not delivered. So the question is, why do we send quite complicated systems very late instead of delivering weapons which are already available since weeks, since months? And the government must reply these questions because it's not in the will of our parliament to be so reluctant.
As a member of parliament for the opposition, have you asked the government why these systems that you say were available much earlier were not delivered? And what was the answer?
The answer was that they are already preparing the delivery of MLRS, the delivery of Gepard, but they did not explain why they don't want to deliver Leopards and Martin tanks. I believe, in the meantime, this might be a question of principle not to do that, but I hope that it is not a consequence of the phone calls with the Russian Prime Minister, with the Russian President. And I seek for a clearer statement, for a better explanation by the Chancellery. We could support that if the Chancellery was able to explain its reluctance. But without any explanation, it won't help. And it is also damaging the reputation of Germany in our eastern neighborhood.
Well, the reputation, of course, is pretty damaged already. It's been said many times that the Bundeswehr is not ready to deliver these systems because it is in a sorry state. And it was, in fact, your party who was in charge of the Bundeswehr for many, many years in the previous government. So who is now responsible for the sorry state that the Bundeswehr is in, and that also means that Ukraine is not getting the weapons it wants from Germany?
We all are responsible, but it's also the truth that Germany is the fourth strongest deliverer of armaments. It has the fourth strongest armaments industry of the world, and this industry is ready to deliver, but they must not. They don't get the guarantee, they don't get the allowance, the permission to deliver. So this is not part of the former government. This is the responsibility of the Chancellor. And the same Chancellor who is now working for the Zeitenwende has hampered the 2% goal, has hampered the armed drones as finance minister, and he was also not willing to pursue the goal to reform the nuclear sharing. And we really support that he has changed the issue, which the former government couldn't do because it was blocked by our coalition partner. But it doesn't help to have a blame and shame game. It is very helpful that this government has changed the former position. And my party is responsible, yes, that's true, but we were not focused on the Bundeswehr. We were focused on social welfare. We were focused on other items. And it's also a lesson learned that all parties who have responsibility for our country should define security not only with social welfare and cohesion, but also with economic competitiveness, domestic and foreign security. So we need a culture of security, and this was neglected since 1990, since the unification. And this is also a very tremendous, a very important lesson learned, that we have to invest in our security independent from the threat analysis.
I'm afraid we have to leave it here. German lawmaker Roderich Kiesewetter there with the opposition CDU party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elvers.
Now, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has welcomed the latest pledge by Washington to provide $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine. It's the largest specific commitment to ship weapons since Russia's invasion began. Speaking in Brussels, NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg welcomed the announcement yesterday by the United States to further increase the support for Ukraine. And he pledged that NATO countries would remain united in this effort.
And yesterday at the Defense Ministerial meeting, it was a strong message from all NATO allies and partners that we are prepared for long haul. NATO allies are prepared to continue to provide substantial, unprecedented support to Ukraine.
For more on this, let's bring in our Brussels correspondent Terry Schultz. Terry, a message of unity there from Stoltenberg, but French President Emmanuel Macron showed a desire yesterday for Ukraine to negotiate with Russia. Is that a view widely shared by other NATO countries?
Well, Gerhard, it really depends on what you're talking about. I don't think there are any countries who don't believe that peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are a desirable end, but that Ukraine should somehow give up territory or be willing to lay down its arms while Russia continues its onslaught in the country. You won't find a lot of NATO allies vocally supporting that view. And there was a lot of outrage with these comments by Macron, not the first time he's said something like this, and by comments even by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in the past. Remarks that Russia should not be humiliated, that it must be treated as a great power. Of course, the countries that are supporting Ukraine so strongly don't believe that Ukraine should have to back down in the face of this. And so, yeah, there's a lot of anger. And, some of the most vehement opponents of these views are the Baltic states, who are consistently saying that there shouldn't even be phone calls to Vladimir Putin, reminding that, nobody was calling Adolf Hitler during World War II and asking him what he thought should happen next.
You mentioned the Baltic states today. Latvia's defense minister said he wants more NATO troops and he's fed up of paying for the lunch of others. So is NATO beginning to show some cracks there?
Well, I'm not surprised at all by those comments by the Latvian defense minister. Not only are the Baltic countries among those who spend more than 2% of their GDP on their own militaries, but they're, of course, the countries with the most to lose should the Kremlin make another unexpected move and decide to cross the border into a NATO territory. So what has come to light in the last few days is that with the German announcement, which was initially very welcome, that it would be assigning another 1,000 or so troops to Lithuania, where it's the lead nation in the NATO enhanced forward presence, that most of those troops would actually be staying in Germany. That is something that the Baltic states are not at all happy about, because that they want more boots on the ground right there on the border with Russia. They feel that this is the only effective way to deter Russia and, in the worst case, of course, to defend their territories against a Russian incursion. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about these plans as we head into the NATO summit the end of the month. We may even be hearing more about it today, but certainly the Baltic states and the other frontline eastern flank countries are going to want to hear that there will be boots on the ground in a persistent presence, a persistent NATO presence on their territories.
Terry, we've been discussing Germany's lack of speed in delivering heavy weapons a lot today. From the viewpoint of the NATO partners there, is Germany doing enough, and is Germany doing enough fast enough?
Well, there has been a lot of pressure by NATO allies on Germany, and now they are stepping forward. The U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin yesterday mentioned Germany very positively in pointing out that the German government had now decided to send 3, albeit not 4, multiple launch rocket systems to Ukraine, and that's something the U.S. is providing 4, the U.K. is providing 3, and Germany is providing 3 as well. So that's something that certainly is very welcomed, but as your previous guest explained, there are a lot of questions about why Germany didn't do more and didn't do it sooner. And I think the country asking those questions with the most emotion is, of course, Ukraine. But again, as U.S. Defense Secretary Austin pointed out yesterday, when you're in the middle of a war, nothing can come fast enough. It's never going to be enough. And so he said it's understandable that Ukraine is not happy with the speed or quantity of weapons that are coming. And Germany does have a lot of questions to answer about whether it could have done this better and faster.
DW correspondent Terry Schultz there, reporting from NATO headquarters in Brussels. Thank you, Terry. And now let's have a look at some of the other stories that are making headlines today. Some 300 people were rescued from an overcrowded boat off the coast of Libya. A non-profit group, CI, found the fishing vessel adrift on Wednesday morning. The United Nations says 3,000 people died trying to reach Europe via the Mediterranean on boats last year. Australia's new government has announced a pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030. It was one of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's key election issues. Officials say the country is turning the corner on climate change, which is blamed for extreme weather events that have battered Australia in recent years. Police in Brazil says a man has confessed to killing British journalist Dom Phillips and the indigenous expert Bruno Pereira. The suspect then led authorities to the burial site of the two men who went missing on June 5th. The pair had received threats for their research into illegal activities in the rainforest. The UN Refugee Agency says the number of displaced people worldwide has risen to 100 million. That's the highest number recorded since World War II. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is one of several crises that have pushed the number higher. The US Federal Reserve has approved its largest single interest rate hike in almost 30 years. The 0.75% increase comes as consumer prices in the US reached a 40-year high. Costs for food, gasoline and housing are all rising faster than expected. The central bank hopes the adjustment will help tame the soaring inflation. The actor Kevin Spacey was granted bail by a London judge after appearing in court on sexual offence charges. A plea hearing has been set for mid-July. The alleged assaults took place between 2005 and 2013. Allegations against the Oscar winner emerged years ago during the Me Too movement. Spacey denies any wrongdoing. You're watching DW News. Before we go, here's a quick look at our top story at this hour. The leaders of Germany, France and Italy have been holding their first face-to-face talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Kyiv. The high-profile talks were also attended by Romania's President Klaus Iohannis. The much-anticipated visit follows days of speculation over whether it actually would go ahead, and as Ukraine intensifies its pleas for more heavy weapons from its Western allies. Earlier, Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron and Mario Draghi were taken on a tour of the Kyiv suburb of Irpin, the site of alleged Russian war crimes. That's it from me and the news team. Stay with us. Up next is Conflict Zone. Tim Sebastian talks to Radosław Sikorski, the Polish MEP and former Polish Foreign Minister. I'm Gerhard Elfers. I have more headlines for you at the top of the hour. Thanks for watching.